My name is Roxanne de la Torre. I am proud to be part of the PBJN steering committee and also a co-facilitator with John Loggins of our Next Generation Fellows program. We're going to talk briefly just to introduce you to what the Next Generation Fellows program is, simply because there are so many people who are part of the planning of this institute who are Next Generation Fellows. And also you'll see many of our fellows taking lead of various different things throughout the Institute. For example, Dimitri Morgan is going to be leading our BIPOC Healing Circle this afternoon. And so just so that you know what we're talking about whenever we mention the Next Gen Fellows. Basically, the Next Gen Fellowship was a response by the Place-Based Justice Network to nurture a more diverse and inclusive network. Luckily, we had a grant with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And through that grant, the Place-Based Justice Network has been able to support so far 2 cohorts of emerging leaders of color in the fields of place-based community engagement work. And over 2 years, there have been 9 total fellows. 4 of them have moved on to community-based roles outside of higher education, but we have all been able to still retain the community that we've been building over the past 2 years and continue to join with one another through conversation and support. Luckily, and through the generosity of the Seattle University and USD, the University of San Diego, we're going to be having another cohort, a 3rd cohort in the next academic year. And more information about that will be forthcoming in a future newsletter. So please keep an eye out in your inboxes. Personally, for me, the experience as a fellow in the Next Gen Fellowship program has been what I would say is exactly what Nadine was talking about yesterday, the 2 things, the 2 pieces of advice she would have given herself years earlier, which were to have a community of support around you. That's definitely what the Fellows program has been for me. And 2, to have something to anchor yourself in self-care. And for me in particular, I was working at a university in New York City as a director of community engagement and really feeling those stresses, and especially as a BIPOC person in those spaces, really not feeling welcome and supported consistently and heard consistently. And being able to join the Next Gen Fellows really just helped to change that narrative for me, helped me to process a lot of things that I was dealing with at my own campus, but also see myself as part of a bigger movement and a bigger, more supportive community with other BIPOC individuals who are able to uplift and hold each other up on a day-to-day basis. So even though I've now left, I no longer am in higher education. I now work for a community-based organization in New York City that supports those struggling with housing and food insecurity. I really credit the Next Gen Fellows for being able to help me process my own vocational desires and center my own self-care to make that decision for myself. So I'm always grateful to the Place-Based Justice Network and the Next Gen Fellows for all that it's given me in that regard. And I'll turn it back to Julia to share her experience as a fellow this past year.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Roxanne. I'll say personally, as a current Next Gen Fellow, that this experience has been everything and also nothing that I was able to expect. As someone who currently isn't a campus-based professional, but works for a think tank that is concerned with the role of higher education and racial equity and economic democracy, for me, as someone who has a student affairs and academic affairs background, who's made that pivot to the nonprofit space, it was extremely important and meaningful for me to be around other folks who not only share experiences as folks of color on often predominantly white or white serving institutions, but who are seeking spaces and to create the conditions where they can act with integrity. And what I'm so appreciative of is how the conversations that have surfaced in our space as Next Gen Fellows have been woven into even this Leadership Institute. Accountability, integrity, vocation has been so central to our discussions and our shared exploration and journey. So it makes me really excited that we get these 3 days to continue to dig deeper into that. It makes me especially excited about today's session, which is focused on organizational and community accountability from the perspectives of today's discussants from the University of Pittsburgh. And I think it's a particularly special treat that we're hearing from folks at Pitt, given the role that that institution has played in supporting the mission and activities of the Place-Based Justice Network. So real quickly, Pitt's very own Kirk Holbrook co-led all of the continuous learning sessions with Chris Nive this past year. And it's been fundamental to the success and continued engagement of members during such a challenging year. So just wanted to voice that appreciation. And with that being said, I'm really excited that I have the pleasure of introducing one of our discussants for today, Jamie Ducar, who's also played such a significant role in the support and direction of the Place-Based Justice Network. So Jamie Ducar currently serves as the Director of Community Engagement at the University of Pittsburgh's Office of Community and Governmental Relations. In her role, she leads university efforts and interactions with key neighborhood constituencies by monitoring and addressing community concerns in the greater Oakland area and partnering to advance strategic engagement and public service initiatives across a wide range of stakeholders. Jamie serves the institution as co-chair of both the Community Engaged Scholarship Forum and the Staff Engagement Community of Practice in partnership with the Associate Vice Provost for Academic Innovation, Julia Spears. She's on the steering committee for the Pitt United Way campaign as well. And notably, in this upcoming academic year, Jamie will also serve as vice chair for the PBJN steering committee. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jamie.
And I have the great pleasure of introducing Jamie's co-facilitator, Daren Ellerbee. Daren A. Ellerbee is a community engagement professional and director of the University of Pittsburgh's Community Engagement Center in Homewood, a historically African-American neighborhood located 3.5 miles from their campus. As architect and lead of Pitt's hyperlocal place-based engagements, she is committed to social justice and to promoting anti-racist practices. Darren works alongside residents, community leaders, and elected officials as a collaborator seeking alignment with community goals and reciprocity. Thank you also for being here, Darren. And I have the great pleasure of turning it over to the both of you to lead us in our core dialogue session centering organizational accountability. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. So that actually takes 5 minutes off the agenda that Darren and I had built to introduce ourselves. That was so beautiful. So thank you so much for being with you all. In addition to the wonderful intro that Julia offered, I do just want to share with you all kind of who I am and what I bring to myself in this role, as I've only been in higher ed for about 4 years now. And so I was raised up professionally as a human services practitioner. And so my very first job was crisis in-home services for CYF. So frontline, when children are either at risk of being immediately taken from their homes or have almost immediately been taken from their homes, part of that crisis triage team that was coming to sit alongside of parents and caregivers and natural supports to offer a pathway forward. And so that really grounds all of the work that I've done. Spent 10 years in the various systems that surround children and their families, from child welfare to behavioral health, to multi-systems interventions, to education, and found myself at the University of Pittsburgh in the Office of Community and Governmental Relations. And so I'll allow Daren to also offer a little bit of her background, as she is also not a born and bred higher ed person as well. And I think that you'll notice that part of our language and our approach is our other lives being kind of baked in, right? And things kind of layer on top of one another to lead to the people that we are. So Daren?
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. I'm Daren Ellerbee. First and foremost, we're only like 10 minutes in, and I feel so loved. I feel like I'm in a room full of family, and I just absolutely adore PBJN. I'm so happy to be at another summer institute. I believe my first one was a few years ago, and it was in Maryland at Loyola. If yep, okay, all right, good. I see Erin nodding her head. Hey, girl. So I want to first bring into the room my dad, because I feel like I can't talk about who I am as a community engagement practitioner and just why I'm so passionate without bringing up John Ellerbee. Today is his heavenly birthday, and we're celebrating. I've received numerous text messages from my family today because they know today is his birthday. And as an ancestor and as someone who taught me about work ethic, the value of giving back to community, you just can't be a leech in the world, he used to always say, and so much more. I want to invite you to drop into the chat who you're carrying. Who is that person that spoke life into you? Who's the person that made a way out of no way? Either a living legend or an ancestor that you carry with you as you come and go, doing this work that weighs us down oftentimes, right? Thinking of my dad gives me so much joy. So drop that name in the chat for me, and then I'll just continue a little bit and pass it back to Jamie. But I actually came out of city government. I worked for the Urban Redevelopment Authority for a few years before getting this role. And prior to that, I also worked in social services for an organization called CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates. It's a national group, and they're based out of Seattle, actually. Shout out to Kent. And my good folks in Seattle. And, I grew up in both of those roles. So by the time I made it to Pitt, I had existing relationships in the community. Folks knew me, I knew them. And I was really able to roll my sleeves up and get to work. Transitioning over from like government life and nonprofit life into the academy was interesting. Like I had to learn about what academic freedom was. And we'll come back to that. And I'm just very proud to represent the University of Pittsburgh. Happens to be my alma mater, and a city that I'm from. I'm first generation born in the North, as my Southern family always reminds me every time I go to visit. My family is actually from the Carolinas, respectfully. So I'm very passionate about community engaged work because I want to see everyone thriving. And it might be my Sagittarius optimism kicking in, but I feel like it's possible. And I feel like, with everyone coming together to work together, we can get there one day. And we don't have to wait until our kids are grown, right? I don't have children, by the way. Jamie, we don't have to wait till yours is grown to see folks thriving here. And that's what we're working towards. So I want to pass it back to you. And I so look forward to this discussion.
Thank you for that, Daren. So I think that it's helpful for folks that are unfamiliar with the University of Pittsburgh for us to start our conversation with the city of Pittsburgh, with Allegheny County, and with what our region as a whole has been experiencing, not just over the past 5 to 10 years, but I think historically. And so Daren shared that she's Pittsburgh born and bred. I actually came to Pittsburgh in 2003 to attend college, and I was one of those few folks that actually never left. So I never escaped, and I've been here for 18 years now. Grew up in the suburbs outside of New York City, and so one of the things that was very apparent to me when I came to Pittsburgh, right, was that I did not see a very clear, strong Black middle class. And it was something that I had taken for granted where I had grown up, that there were um, folks that had parents that had a diversity of jobs and roles that allowed them to either work in Manhattan and commute, and so the expectations of post-secondary education, of Black neighborhoods that could be considered thriving and healthy, and in general, just a social expectation, right, around what it means to be a Black middle class person were very, very different for me when I came to Pittsburgh. And so it took a lot of work for me to find my people, to find my group. Um, for better or for worse, I found folks that were very, very close to my own identity that grew up here. So all of our friend group, it's a whole whopping 5 of us, but 3 of them are Pittsburgh natives, born and bred. One of them is actually from Daren's area. And so another thing about Pittsburgh is that you're never more than 2 connections removed from anybody. And so I started my role knowing Daren and having a very safe space as my best friend in the world, and my sister. She and Darren had actually grown up together. And so we had shared family as we were entering this professional relationship that helped us to get close. But Pittsburgh is a place that has a lot of socioeconomic and also racial segregation. So there are predominantly Black neighborhoods that have high concentrations of economic exclusion, just spatial exclusion from our drivers in the region. And it's also a place that you'll see and read about, right, is one of the most livable places to be in the country. It's a place where folks from higher cost areas are looking towards our area to relocate. And it's a place that really positions itself as a center of innovation. And so what really is going to ground part of our conversation is the fact that a few years ago, our Gender Equity Commission, which is a city commission with an executive director, they decided to co-author a research-based report in partnership with the University of Pittsburgh. And they wanted to look at the intersections of really what the lived experience was for women and femmes in Pittsburgh and how race might intersect with that. And what they saw is when they started kind of combing through the data, race was so overwhelming in the conversation that they ended up reframing their entire first document to really stay hyper focused on the experiences of Black women in Pittsburgh. Because to be completely honest, the outcomes that they were seeing were so terrible. And so what they found is that Pittsburgh is one of the worst places in the country to be a Black woman across socioeconomic status. Whether you are a birthing woman or not, your level of education, the amount of money that you make, you are consistently better off being someplace else. And so that set off a lot of alarm bells in our region. One, because there were a lot of Black women and femmes that said, well, hello, if you would have asked us that, we could have told you, right? We don't need a team of researchers to come in and release a report. And so who was behind the report, who was at the table for that, and who was missing from the table were big, big conversations that were happening in the city when the report was released. But then also there was a real kind of acknowledgement and reckoning with the fact that Pittsburgh is a place that is stacked with institutional power, right? And so we've got 2 Research One universities within a stone's throw of one another. We've got 6 other colleges and universities within our city limits. And we've got a real opportunity, right, to do better by the lived experiences of folks. And so at the same time that people were asking for shared power in determining what sort of research would be most helpful to move forward and what sort of action would be most helpful to move forward, right? Our team is in the forming stages of beginning to navigate what it means to be part of an institution that would like to engage in very different ways. And so I think it's helpful to kind of lay out that backstory, because this is around the time that Daren is entering her role as the director of a community engagement center in a predominantly Black neighborhood as a Black woman, and having to somewhat answer for, right, the ways in which our university positions itself and wields its power within communities. And so I think it's helpful. I'm going to hand it off to Daren to really just talk about her first year in the role and the ways in which Pitt really did work to do things differently.
Thank you, Jamie. And before I respond to that, I'm trying not to cry because what's in the chat is just so beautiful. Thank you, everyone who responded. And Melissa, facts. Okay, Jamie is just dropping straight knowledge for those of you familiar with Pittsburgh. So with that being said, I sashayed into this role, with a lot of, hope and with the knowledge of community, but not necessarily knowing my sphere of influence in the role. When I interviewed, I knew that the University of Pittsburgh had prepared for my hire, but I really didn't know exactly what Pitt wanted to do in community and how this CEC, how this space would benefit community. And I mentioned in my intro, I even needed to go through a process of educating myself on academic freedom and the policies of the institution, because my only knowledge of the University of Pittsburgh was as a student. This was my first time actually being employed by Pitt, and it's a whole different environment. But my main focus, and sometimes I have to remember that I'm seeking university and community mutual benefits and reciprocity, because I'm so passionate about community. I was hired in July of 2017 and immediately got to work having conversations with residents and community leaders, answering questions for them about the University of Pittsburgh, the CEC, if folks were definitely concerned about Pitt ushering in gentrification, for instance, because Homewood is just one of those communities. And let me explain, Homewood is only about 1 square mile in size. It's very small, but they have so many nonprofit agencies and institutions here, including the YMCA, the Carnegie Library has been in Homewood since 1911. There are groups that have just recently celebrated 50 and 60 years of consistent community work to revitalize. So there are strong assets already in place in such a small area. And so for instance, the population is just over 6,000 people. 91% of the people here identify as being African American. So when you have a predominantly white institution like the University of Pittsburgh coming into a minoritized community like Homewood, folks would assume because I look like the community that we were engaging, things would be easier. Folks wouldn't have those level of or that level of concern. So I knew immediately that if anything, things would be a little bit harder because I look like the community, and because a lot of people knew me. So they knew that they could come up to me and have just straight up conversations about how to access the University of Pittsburgh, how to partner with the University of Pittsburgh if that was a possibility. There was a fear initially here that the CEC was only for Pitt people. So we really push forward an effort to meet folks where they were, so to speak. So in that first 18 months before I had a space like this to sit in, I was in my car, driving throughout the neighborhood, meeting folks at their homes or at the coffee shop. There's only one here. That folks frequent. Shout out to the Everyday Cafe, where I would have whole days just sitting there and pushing out on social media. Hey, you can talk to Darren, you can talk to the CEC director at the Everyday Cafe. Attending community meetings, of course, and making sure that I was on the agenda for those, whatever it took. I knew that I needed to be that person to look folks in the eye and to say, this is what we're doing. We're pivoting how the university had engaged with you before. And this is something new. We have a 15-year commitment in this space. We didn't purchase the land. And none of you will be surprised to know that that was one of the main questions. Is Pitt buying up everything? Is Pitt taking over in Homewood? And I could actually see some of the stress ease off of folks' faces when I told them that we were leasing the building from Bible Center Church, that this is and was an underutilized space that will return to the community to be an asset after our lease is up. And it doesn't mean that Pitt is going to be out of community. Our students, our faculty, and our staff have worked in and around Homewood for many, many decades. And once this lease is up in this beautiful space, we'll continue to work in organizations and with our partners. But we are very intentional in this space to say that we're committed. We're all in. We're not only saying we're doing it, we're doing it. So for me, accountability comes from those conversations I had. Like, I was the person literally sitting there engaging folks on social media, inviting them to have a cup of coffee with me and breaking bread, saying this is what we're doing, and now we're doing it. And I'm not the type of person that likes to lie or fib or anything like that. And I take what I promise, and this is something else I learned from my dad. I take what I promise very seriously, and I promise to do right by people. Now, I'm not ignorant of the fact that there are unknowns, right? We don't know what may come in 5 years. We may not know what may come in 10 years. But I know as a practitioner in this position of influence right now, I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that unintentional harm to the community does not happen through our actions. So we have a commitment not to be a research participant, I guess you could say recruitment site, because early on we heard from community that that's not what they wanted. We made a commitment to work with community as co-creators of our activities here. And surprisingly, our partners have seen us pivot in real time from opportunities, because we found out that someone else is already doing it, or someone else is going after the grant. And that has also helped to share a lot of, or to build trust. And I have an advisory council of 30 plus individuals, primarily made up of residents. And those people support me on so many different levels. The council has helped to identify, especially in that first year, programs, pathways of opportunity to make sure we're not replicating. They are like my sages, so to speak, and they hold me accountable, and they hold the CEC accountable, because they're the ones who help hire me. They're the ones who, vouch for me up front to say, we know Miss Ellerbee from the Urban Redevelopment Authority, and we think she would do a good job here. And that has helped to build an environment of buy-in from my council that I can't even really properly describe. They use a lot of we language to discuss the center, and I think that speaks volumes too. So I want to stop there because I could probably take up the rest of this time talking about the closest thing I have to a baby, this center. But I'm going to pass it to Jamie.
Thank you, Darren. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you ending on really the council and the role that they serve in kind of the shared governance structure that the CECs have. And so just for everybody's knowledge, there's a CEC that is fully open. That's Darren's facility in Homewood. And we are in process of opening a second CEC, which is right now in a temporary space in the Hill District, which is another historically predominantly Black neighborhood in the city of Pittsburgh. It's unique because it's contiguous actually to our own neighborhood here in Oakland. And so we have the added community conversations and pressures really around space. And so we had to acknowledge while moving forward with our Hill District CEC that the university had previously used eminent domain to take land and to use it and to repurpose it for institutional means. And it didn't happen so long ago, right? It happened recently enough for there to be still a very strong community narrative and word of mouth around the ways in which University of Pittsburgh was willing to engage. And so Kirk Holbrook, our colleague, had a lot of work from his context, right, in really setting his initial conversations with community on accountability and on reckoning with really what was a bare truth that folks had experienced. And so I want to be clear, right, that each CEC has a very unique process, that Homewood had a lot of concerns specifically around research, around being over-researched, around not getting data back for the use of their communities. And the Hill District was in a space where they had already organized and had a community master plan and vision for itself, and was very interested in being sure that the University of Pittsburgh was willing to adapt itself to the vision that had already been set for the neighborhood. And so that neighborhood has a very rich history in the arts and culture. August Wilson House is there, and we know that there are some jazz greats that have spent a lot of time in the Hill District. And so the arts have become a major part of the way that we've been able to organize some early programming. There's going to be a full-fledged STEAM studio for the youth. And so as we think about the CEC concept and how it shifts neighborhood by neighborhood, as the partners change, the programming changes, the core initiatives change, and really the university is in a listening space when it comes to how it can approach spaces outside of our campus for highest and best use for shared initiatives. And so I'd like to speak a little bit, because my role is different than Daren's, about what we're doing from kind of this centralized university perspective to help build out accountability across our institution, because we know that it isn't enough to have these great bright spots in community. Although sometimes as we communicate, right, sometimes we communicate leading with the CECs because it's a multi-million-dollar investment. It's a 15 to 25-year investment. And it's really showing, I think, kind of the best of what a university like ours can offer. My role is a little bit more in the weeds and in the background of how our business and operations come together to support a real culture shift within the university. So I'll share that when I came to Pitt, I started as the Assistant Director of Community Relations. And what I had been taught of that job was really focused on a risk management perspective of university community interaction. It was how can we have positive messages going out to our neighbors closest to our campus about our university and our students, despite the fact that we know our neighbors are experiencing really real challenges being directly adjacent to and sometimes engulfed by a large university with over 20,000 students, right? We know that over 7,000 of them are living off campus, that they've brought down the quality of housing stock directly adjacent to campus and shot up the prices, that there are now only kind of narrow pockets of home ownership that are being retained in the area because of the way that prices have changed. There are folks willing to come to the neighborhood, you know, with a suitcase full of cash and buy a home for 3 times what it's worth just because of its proximity to our university. And so while those things have been happening and actively harming a sense of community, we realized that, you know, using a risk management tact was not going to be the way in which we would be able to move forward. At a certain point, if you can't acknowledge and shift, then there's no conversation that even needs to be had. And so residents were starting to drop out of the process, right? Like, what's the point of talking to a university that will not listen? And so with the CECs coming on board, and with Lena, with my work kind of falling under the purview of Dr. Lena D'Astilio's shop, I had a lot more access to thinking about what liberatory engagement could mean, right? It wasn't part of my role. It wasn't part of my function, but it was something that started to naturally diffuse just by nature of being on the same team, which was really, really nice to see. Another opportunity that we had to really go big, right, with this shift of culture and accountability was the fact that there were a couple of things happening at once. So one, we decided to go for Carnegie classification and engagement. Two, we had to start organizing ourselves to submit what's called an institutional master plan, which is required by the city of Pittsburgh for any large institution or nonprofit. So our hospitals, our colleges, all of our big organizations are required to submit this large plan to the city every year that pushes us through a set of city boards and commissions. And so this time around for institutional master plan, the city had actually changed their guidelines. And for the first time ever, a strong public engagement strategy and also a set of strategies around neighborhood protection and enhancement were mandatory parts of that process. So what I had heard was before, right, we talked about just our building footprint and this is what we're going to build and this is what we're going to buy and we're done. We couldn't do it that way anymore. And so our facilities management and our planning development and real estate teams brought us in, and by us, I mean our office, so community and governmental relations, brought us in to have a real conversation around what it is our expectations would be around what we felt a strong public engagement process could look like. And so part of my role is being embedded, as Darren is, in community all the time. So I spend, I want to say, at least 12 hours a month in community-led meetings, listening to our neighbors and part of various advocacy groups. And so that was my opportunity to really get some face time with the leadership of our institution to get very frank and real about what the lived experiences were of our neighbors closest to campus. What were some of the perennial issues that we had ignored or not resourced enough to be able to account for? And what some of our opportunities were to really highlight what we were doing in new and better ways. And so that led to our teams actually being able to have a really strong shared space where we were given proximity to and a much better understanding of what the institutional pressures around enrollment would be so that we can understand what the effects might be on the neighborhood, on how many beds we plan to actually build over the next 10 years so that we would know, right, like if we're going to continue to be a major part of the problem for over occupancy of apartments and prices in the neighborhood, but also where there might be some opportunity to just honestly take what had been very small niche programs and blow them up and make them a lot more accessible to our neighbors and to the public. And so that was part of my work. It was a really long process. So we started in January or February of 2019. We just had city council pass us through in our vote this week. And so it's been a major part of my job, right? To better understand all of the different ways in which our institution is impacting communities and ways in which we can do better. So we came up with a set of 74 strategies that we had to sell internally to every single one of those leaders within our institutions to take on. And I'm sure, you know, some of you are from large institutions. You know, I think we have 13,000 faculty and staff. And so these are senior vice chancellors and vice chancellors. It takes a lot of work to be able to say, hey, Senior Vice Chancellor for Business and Operations, I want to talk to you about the 30 strategies that are going to really change our impact on communities and help the University of Pittsburgh just be a better actor, right? And so part of it is appealing to all of the different pressures of the universities. We know the neoliberal pressures, right? We can always say like, this is going to be great for us, right? It's a tactical advantage for us to really dig in on sustainability because we know our students care about it. We know our local electeds are going to love it. There are certain things that are easy sells. There are also things that aren't necessarily so easy to sell, right? Like, which is, hey, pit dining, why is it that we only allow kind of students to use their card swipe dollars at these national chains? What would it mean for us to allow us to use our card swipe dollars at locally owned businesses? What would it mean to be hyper specific around Black owned businesses and women owned businesses so that they can get a share of those dollars? How about we actually set a target of over $1 million of our student spending in that space? And so those are conversations that, you know, I always start with asking an inch, but I always want to take a mile, right? And it takes a really big team to think about that. Hey, procurement, why does our contracting work this way, where we're defaulting to using these huge mega corporations for everything we do? We know somebody in the Hill District, or we know somebody in Homewood, right, that can do the catering, that can do the shirts, that can do this, that can do that. And so we've been able to slowly but surely really get more comfortable with the language around what it means to be an anchor in a different way. Pitt had really shied away from understanding itself as an anchor, right? It's a huge research power. And we've got the effects of all these other universities that are also putting pressures in neighborhoods in ways that can allow us to kind of like not take all of the heat, right? But we're now leaning in as a leader. So we're the only public related university. We aren't completely public, but we do get a certain amount of allocation from the Commonwealth. And we now are in a place where I'm building out a public dashboard for these strategies. So I will be able to share, Stacy. We're in the process of building that out. And so now everyone has had over 2 years to acclimate themselves to me and my role and our team and the ways in which we position asks of the university. And now everybody's on board, right? So I'm like, let's build a public dashboard. I don't want people to have to know me to know where we are on those 74 strategies. I want it loud and proud on community.pitt.edu. It should be part of our planning, development, and real estate. And we should be setting the metrics for this up front so that folks are tracking and able to see how it is we're consistently working towards these aspirations, right? Because they really are aspirations. We've got some aggressive goals around what it is we'd like to do. Um, and it's part of my role, right, to serve as that translator. So I'm in a very institutional space, but with this constant reminder of what is it that someone in the community that doesn't know us, right? Like, how would they receive this? How would they find this? And so I'm thankful to be put in this position. And it starts to intertwine with a lot of the other things that are happening at the university. And so I'm able to play in that role with what feels like some of the folks that are furthest away from community engagement at our university, right? So I'm more kind of their technical advisor and the angel on this side, right? And then the other part of my work is thinking about how we build up and support networks. So my goal is to, right, have a coalition like PBJN, right? Have this sense of family and feeling of shared space and orientation. And so that's my work in thinking about what it takes to build capacity for our community engaged practitioners. Because when I came into my role, I didn't know who my people were outside of my team, right? Or who would have a sense of understanding of where I was coming from and what was important to me. And so I'm a bit of a joiner. And so there was nothing for me to join. So I said, hey, we should create this, right? Let's create a community of practice. Let's have people actually have the opportunity to raise their hands and say, like, hi, I care about the way that the University of Pittsburgh engages in its outreach and engagement and its K-12 pipeline and all of these initiatives that are supposed to have public impact. And I want to know who else is doing that and how we can work together to do better. And so that's been a couple of years now, but everything that I'm kind of learning from the folks that aren't involved in community engagement practice at all, right? That's still informing my work with CEPs because it's really important to understand that other side of the house. It's really important to understand the other people that have very strong positional power within our institutions that sometimes can work against the culture that you're trying to build within your, we're not a counterculture, right? But we're something that isn't necessarily the institutional norm. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about kind of the two sides of my brain here at Pitt and the way that I navigate. And then right down the middle is leading all of our faculty and staff volunteerism and service. And so what I've been trying to do is make that more liberatory as well, right? And decenter our institution and recenter, right, on what the potential impact on community thriving can be. So we've removed all of our feel-good language around our volunteers and we've shifted to these are our critical impact areas and this is what we care about and why. This is how it impacts our region and the lived experiences of our neighbors. And that's why you should get involved, not because it makes you feel good, right? And so that takes a lot of work too. And so I feel like Darren and Kirk are pushing our culture in very concrete ways with each and every single faculty member that comes their way and is like, hey, I want to do a research project on blah, blah, blah. Can you get me some community members? And Darren has to like, okay, slow down and stop, right? Like, this is how we do harm and showing people how you do harm without recognizing, you know, folks think that as long as there's good intentions, right, that there's no harm done, but we know that that's not the case.
Well, we know the community's timing is not the university's timing, right? So that clashes a lot, I think, in the hyperlocal experiences on the ground here in Homewood. One of the things that I want to bring up, and Jamie, make sure you get in the chat because there's a whole lot of good stuff in there.
Okay,
But one of the things that I wanted to mention, because Jamie started to discuss buy, build, hire, and how the university is spending in community. So the way that shows up in Homewood is we've had conversations with a group called the Homewood Community Development Collaborative, and the collaborative is made up of 9 local organizations focused on community revitalization and development. And a lot of builders, a lot of developers have to meet with the collaborative for approval on their projects, especially those projects that require public funding. So we've been having discussions with the collaborative, and they pushed back on us, and I was proud that they did. And they said, what opportunities, or let me just take a step back. They not only said, or asked what opportunities are at the University of Pittsburgh to contract and so forth. But they said, some of them, that they feared that businesses here did not have the capacity. But what supports could the University of Pittsburgh provide those businesses at the same time? And is there a way to look inward and say, and I'm just going to use widgets as an example, but I can trust you, I don't think we need a million widgets at Pitt, but if there was a call out for someone to make widgets, is there a program that can help cultivate a business that may not be able to make a million widgets, but is there a program that we can help cultivate them to get there? So, you know, I love this role because there's room built into it to have discussions and to see where the possibilities are, because we're so new. I don't like to think that everything is on the table, but to be honest with you, I'm willing to have the discussion. I'm willing to pull in the Lena Distilios, the Jamie Ducars, and others to see, you know, what the possibilities are, you know, to support. But the university is very committed to buy, build, hire, and it shows, because we are not only having these discussions, but eventually it'll get to the point where we are also creating that resource and that pipeline as well. Now, also, as it relates to my role on the ground here, and I feel like it's relevant and pertinent, is I'm like a matchmaker in a lot of ways. And I thrive when I'm able to take a community organization who I'm very familiar with, their mission, their demographic, their goals, and look inward at Pitt to see what unit, what school, what department could help accelerate the mission of this community group. Because I struggle with saying that we're empowering people, because it implies that folks don't have power. And I approach people, I approach folks here as powerful and capable because they showed up. And my role is to, you know, connect them to an additional resource to get them to the next level, or get them to the finish line, or to whatever that goal is. So in keeping that in mind, I am constantly fielding conversations from Pitt people interested in getting into community. And I can tell that they're a little sad when they talk to me, because I always stress the importance of building relationship and how that can't happen in one conversation. But trust on both sides is important. Why? Because when I approach a community group to say, I have something that could be wonderful for you, are you willing? They trust me enough to know that I did my due diligence, and that whoever I'm connecting them to is solid. But early on, I made mistakes, and I have to admit that. I would make connections, and I hadn't mastered the art of the follow-up yet. And I might hear back that that connection didn't work. or that faculty person, you know, left a bad taste in someone's mouth, right? So over time, and I can't believe it, I'm about 5 years in the role now, I've had to learn the art of the follow-up. So there's a part of this work where I'm matching people together, like you would, you know, two folks dating, right, and being a matchmaker. But then I'm also, you know, staying on board. I'm that driver. I'm looking over things, and I'm making sure that what we said we're going to do, we're doing it. And if we can't do it, then I'm putting it on my shelf or my wait list until we get a grant or until we get the funding, and we're pulling it off and we're doing it. But in that regard, that's an extra layer of care I think that I'm bringing to this role, because you know, I'm willing to do almost whatever it takes to make something happen if there's a willingness. And lastly, part of my self-care is also letting go. So when I leave this place, I sleep very well at night, knowing that I've tried my best to make those connections that are meaningful, to see mutual benefit and reciprocity, and all of those things. But you know, what's the saying? Something about leading a horse to water, but not forcing it to drink. So I sleep very well at night, knowing that I've done everything in my sphere of influence and power, you know, to make a difference in that day. So I encourage the rest of you to do the same too.
And I do just want to address Aaron's comment on preparation, right? And so we think a lot about onboarding, right, and how we can onboard folks, or at least give folks a preview of the way in which we prefer to do things if our office is involved. And so Darren, actually, the Homewood CEC developed a set of onboarding modules for any faculty, staff, or students that are interested in partnering through the center. And so it's an online set of videos that have supplemental activities, and it's all values-based, right? So that folks can truly understand what the CEC model is and what it is not, so that there's some expectation setting there. We had also hoped to get some catalytic internal funding to do a broader anti-racist preparation for our professional faculty and staff that are interested in partnering with our team or participating in volunteerism and public service in the communities. We just thought it was really important to be very explicit about what volunteerism and direct service is and what it is not, and also what the systemic issues are that contribute to the reasons why, right, we're out there trying to do small things to impact our communities. And so we unfortunately didn't get that funding, but we're a tough, scrappy group. So we're trying to figure out how to just do it anyway. And so we'll be working on that over the next year to at least get a pilot and proof of concept that, like, hey, this anti-racist preparation makes sense. And we should be deploying this across the university for all of our CEPs, all of our service, all of our student signature days.
And I want to add, so as it relates to that training module orientation that the CEC has, it's based upon a community-based participatory research report on effective and respectful community engagement. We actually spoke to residents and worked with our School of Social Work, Dr. Mary Omer, shout out to her, in her class in the fall of, I want to say 2018, and we built, or 2017, and we created the training module from there. Jamie has already said it, but I'll add that though I'm very thankful for that module, it's not hefty enough, right? We need more supports. And, you know, some naive faculty and students will think, oh, I've done the training module, let's check that off the list. I should be able to get into the center now. And they're very surprised when they have a conversation with me about it. So, and I'm not stopping people. I don't want to allude to blocking, so to speak. I'm more so probably standing in the gap in that case to say, we need to have more conversations. Let me get you some materials. Let's talk about asset-based community development. Here's a wonderful article on equitable engagement, whatever I could give them to help. But I look forward, and I'm on the team too, so it's not just Jamie doing this work, but I look forward to seeing the outcomes of these efforts, because I can tell you as the person fielding a lot of these inquiries, they're definitely needed. And then I want to actually, if you don't mind, Jamie, respond to a question about work-life balance. Anthony, thank you so much for posting this question. I work very hard to balance schedule, and I just don't know, those of you who are family folks with kids, especially young children, my heart goes out to you. I don't know how y'all do it because it's just me and the cat. So with that being said, I work very hard to, if I have a late day because of late community meetings, I might start a little later the next day. And I actually schedule project time so that I have time to respond to emails, to write, support letters or whatever it is that people need, and they need to hear from me. Time to talk to my my residents or neighbors, and sometimes we know, being committed, that work can trickle into the house, and personal time. I'll get calls at night as well, so I just try to pick and choose what I respond to and when. And the last thing, the most powerful thing, tool in my bucket to promote work-life balance for myself is the out of office message on a Friday. That helps. That gives me peace, knowing that there's an out of office response on, and I know that whatever it is, it can wait till Monday, because if I'm not whole, if I'm not rested, I am not, as strong of a practitioner for the community as I need to be.
Yeah, so I think it'll help for us to share our full staffing model for our office. So in our office, which is led by Dr. Lena Dostilio, she's our Associate Vice Chancellor for Community Engagement, and she does have our backs, but she also works very hard. So there are 3 directors in our office currently, myself, Darren, and Kirk Holbrook. I work with the support of an assistant director, and during the school year, we have the support of an MSW Community Engagement Fellow. Each of the CEC staffing model is a director, an outreach coordinator, a receptionist, and whatever interns and fellows that they can happen to cobble together. So we're a pretty lean team. With a very big, broad body of work. So we at least have one person that has our backs that we trust in each of our spaces. But we aren't a super staffed up team, and so everyone has to. When we pull out the all call, when there's large community events or community forums, like, we are the volunteers for each other. And so I worked the opening Homewood Community Forum. Darren worked the opening Hill District Forum. We have to be there for each other. Gavin, we are state related. So we sometimes get put in the bucket of public universities, but we're mostly, I would consider ourselves to be a private university. We're like Temple.
Did you see Stacy's question in the chat? That's a good one. How do I slow down university partners whose urgency is counter? We just had a situation. I mean, it happens all the time, but literally last week, our team had a situation like this where, and I'm always fearful of emails that are a little too long, because I can tell the person's trying to avoid a meeting. No, I'm joking. But we got one of these really long emails, detailed with attachments explaining the research project. And it was clear that the person wanted to leverage the CECs as their community partner. So luckily, I didn't have to respond. My supervising colleague, Lena Dostilio, responded, just saying that we we apologize that it sounded like a wonderful project, but the deadline for a community partner, as well as a deadline for our sign off and support was like literally within 3 days. And it's just not enough time. So she explained thoroughly that we're committed to building relationships, and and we want sustainable programs and opportunities through the CECs, and that this person's timeline wasn't feasible. The person's response wasn't as warm and fuzzy as we would hope, but it was made clear. And I'm just thankful for not only Lena's support, but the Chancellor, Dr. Pat Gallagher's support of what we do in our unit, because I feel like, with this sort of, I hate to say top down, but it is top down commitment from him, I feel empowered, and I have confidence to say no. And he actually told me in one of my early meetings with him that there will be times where I'll have to tell some university folks no, to protect the mission of the CEC. And I don't take that for granted, and I don't take that responsibility lightly. And I hate when I have to do it, but I use that for those colleagues who are willing as a learning opportunity to say, I can't give you a quick yes. I mean, I don't want to give you a quick no, but a slow yes. Let's have some conversations. So those who are willing to work, they meet with me, they go through the process, and we've seen some very good programs with what I believe will be very strong outcomes as a result. And then we have others that they fall by the wayside.
So I'm actually not sure what time we're supposed to go until, John and Kent, if you're here, Aaron, but I feel like we might have used all of our time.
Can we keep talking?
So thank you all for such a great conversation and being so active in the chat. Darren and I are accessible and available, so we can throw our emails. We can throw our emails in the chat for you. But I look forward to our transition, where hopefully it'll help my brain settle down a little bit more, firing on all cylinders finally.
Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful.